All right, so as we all join for our workshop this evening, let's go ahead and jump in. So welcome everyone to Glendale's virtual community workshop on the district formation process. We're so glad you've joined us this evening. First, I do want to note that this meeting is being recorded. The recording of this meeting will be posted to the city's district formation website, myglendale.org. So you can go back and watch it again later, or so community members who couldn't be here with us this evening can also go back and watch it and learn about the process. You'll also note that we have the Q&A function enabled for the webinar, so you're welcome to type in your questions as we go, and we'll do our best to answer those questions during the 2 dedicated Q&A discussion periods during the webinar. And we also will ask you to raise your hand at those times, and we'll go ahead and unmute you so you can share your remarks. So moving on to introductions, my name is Jennifer Nentwig, a principal with Trepethy Smith. I am your facilitator here tonight and also part of the team assisting Glendale with outreach about this important issue. Here with us tonight, we also have Dr. Douglas Johnson from National Demographics Corporation, the demography firm working with the City of Glendale. So Doug, would you like to say hi and share anything more about yourself?
Just briefly want to thank everyone who is participating this evening and say just a very brief background. NDC has worked with between 450 and 500 jurisdictions on projects like this. But as a Glendale resident, I'm happy to be working at home for once. So thank you for that and looking forward to our discussion.
Definitely, thank you. So next we'll talk a little bit more about the goals here tonight. Through the districting process and events like tonight's workshop, we're going to learn from the experts, particularly Doug in this case tonight from NDC. We know districting is a complex process, so as a result, it really is an opportunity to educate and explain what this process is and why it's so important. Then, once we've shared information on how the process works, it's important for the experts to hear from you, members of the community. It's important for experts to hear from you because you know your communities best. And we know that district formation relies upon identifying neighborhoods and communities of interest to identify those connected communities that we want to make sure are kept together when the city considers drawing district lines. And lastly, we'll be going over the mapping tools with you with the goal of empowering you to give effective feedback. By absorbing the content that we're going to be sharing tonight, by talking with your friends and neighbors, those are all great ways to participate and to provide effective feedback to inform the process that will determine how the city draws the district lines moving forward. So next, let's address the question, why should you care? Fundamentally, we know democracy just works better when people are engaged. Being engaged means that you're aware of the issues and weighing in on important matters that factor into how your city is run. Second, as we mentioned in the previous slide, there are things that you just know best about your communities, and it's essential that those involved in the process hear from you. And lastly, this really is a once-ever opportunity, in this case, to be part of the city's process of forming city council districts, and those districts determined in this process will be around until 2031. Next slide. So here tonight, we'll be going over the background, the districting process, and what you can expect. We'll also be digging into the legal requirements for districts. I'm sharing a demographic profile of Glendale in particular, and then we'll be opening the floor to you here tonight to get feedback and discussion going about communities of interest. Then NDC will share information and a demo on the public mapping tools. Then we'll again open the floor for a question and answer period to answer questions about the mapping tools that might have been spurred by the demonstration, as well as any additional questions on the process in general. And we'll wrap up by covering some ways that you can continue to stay engaged throughout the process and continue to share feedback as we go. So just re-emphasizing again that tonight, and as you review this recording moving forward, the goal really is to empower the whole community to participate effectively in this process. So with that, I will turn it over to NDC to move forward into the next slide.
Thank you, Jen. And again, thanks to everyone who has come out to jump in early in the process here. It's great to see people interested. This is a fairly lengthy process. So I've got 2 slides on step-by-step what the city will go through and hopefully what all of you will go through with us. We did have the kickoff council hearing on the 13th that has led into these hearings, or I'm sorry, into these forums. And all the input that we hear in these forums will be brought to the council at their July hearing. And if you missed the June 13th hearing, no worries. under state law, both the June 13th hearing and July 11th are essentially the same presentation. We're presenting the same introduction information at both of those. At the 11th, we'll also be adding in what we've heard from the residents in the meantime. At this stage, we're really looking at trying to encourage people to participate, be engaged, and hopefully draw some draft maps. And so, as I'll show you later on, we've got some tools that will help you do that if you want to do that. And any draft maps you want to submit for the initial deadline is August 5th. It's not the final deadline, but it's for the first stage of this process. And so residents will submit maps by August 5th, and all the draft maps that come in by that deadline will be posted by August 8th. The idea of posting them by the 8th is so that residents have a full week, 7 days, prior to when the council first considers those draft maps. So the intro stages are really kind of introducing the issue, getting you engaged, walking through the tools like we'll do tonight. And then August 13th kicks off kind of phase 2 of this process, where we get into actually looking at the maps and residents weighing in on what they like and dislike about different maps. And then council kind of narrowing down the pool of maps into an initial set to take us forward into this phase 2. So if we go to the next slide. We then take that set of initial draft maps and go back out for another round of workshops, virtual and in-person workshops, pop-up events. The city has really given us direction to work very hard to try to engage as much as possible throughout the city in these discussions. And that second round will be more substance, more heft, because there will be actual maps for people to react to. So you're ahead of the game getting in at this first stage. And I encourage your friends, if they don't want to jump in detail now, to take a look at those draft maps and show up in the second round of forums. And if residents want to make some changes to those initial draft maps, they can, using the same tools that I'll show tonight and that are available in that first phase. And so that second round deadline is September 28th. So lots of time to participate, get people engaged, and draw maps. Those maps received by the 28th will be posted by the 3rd. Prior to at that map, the council will go through their previously selected focus maps and all the new and revised maps that have come in that second phase. And the plan is, you never know what will happen specifically, but the plan is for them to pick a map and introduce the ordinance that night. You see on October 24th, there's an additional hearing. That's prior to second reading. So that would be very focused on whatever map was picked October 10th. Of course, the council can, if the residents weigh in and want to change, they can change their mind. And then we'd go back to re-picking a map and reintroducing ordinance. But if it all goes smoothly and kind of along this timeline, you'd pick a map on the 10th, hold one final hearing on the 24th, and then adopt the ordinance that night. Now, unlike in some cities, that's not the final step. The council has decided that rather than them just picking a map and putting it in place, they're going to give the final choice to the voters. And so whatever ordinance the council picks will be put on the ballot in the March 2024 election. So the voters will vote yes or no on ultimately on whether or not to go to district elections using the map selected by the council. It is worth noting that, of course, March of 2024 is our regular city council election. That election will go forward as normal and as Glendale elections have historically gone forward, with a citywide vote on all the seats that are up that year. So the districts we're talking about now, if approved by the voters in March, would be used for the first time in 2026. So that's something important to keep in mind. If we go to the next slide. In terms of rules for how the lines get drawn and the map gets selected, we have a couple of different sets of rules. First, we have the federal laws. So each district must have an equal population, and that is equal number of people as counted by the 2020 census. So it's not an equal number of registered voters or anything like that. It's an equal number of people in each district. Then we have to be sure we comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act, which has many complicated elements to it, but it really boils down to anywhere that there's a neighborhood that is heavily what the law calls a protected class. So Latinos, Asian Americans, African Americans, or Native Americans, that neighborhood cannot be divided in a way that dilutes their voting strength. And those are the 4 groups that are recognized by federal law. At the same time, the third federal consideration is no racial gerrymandering. So we can consider race as one factor, but it cannot be what the court calls the predominant factor. We can't pick a map solely because it hits a certain percentage number for a certain protected class. So those are relatively straightforward. Now, starting in 2020, California adopted what's called the Fair Maps Act, and that set forth a second set of requirements. That's the middle column you see on your screen. First is, and these are in prioritized order. First is the districts have to be contiguous. There's no picking one piece of the city on the west or one piece of the city on the east and then not having those pieces connected, but having one district. All the pieces of a district have to connect. That's pretty straightforward. Then we have to, as much as possible within the federal requirements and contiguity, we have to minimize the division of neighborhoods and what the law calls communities of interest. So communities of interest are socioeconomic geographic areas and areas united by kind of a shared city policy issue, traffic, housing, anything like that, that creates a geographic community that should be kept together and that, as the law says, would benefit from being kept together in one district. So to the degree possible, we need to keep each neighborhood and each community of interest together. The third in this prioritized list is following easily identifiable boundaries. That's pretty straightforward. Try to follow freeways, big hills, rivers and drainage basins, that kind of thing. Make it easy for the voters to understand where the boundaries of their districts are. And then the fourth and final state requirement is for the districts to be compact. And the state defines that as don't bypass one group of people to get to a farther away group of people. Pretty straightforward, and that can be secondary to the higher ranked criteria. So that is just the fourth consideration. The state also prohibits, it's not a requirement, but a prohibition, as stated at the bottom, you cannot draw lines to favor or discriminate against a political party. So no trying to draw a map that'll be better for the Republicans or better for the Democrats. These are nonpartisan offices and the mapping needs to stay nonpartisan. So those are the federal and state requirements. The courts have also approved a set of what we call traditional redistricting principles. So these are goals that the courts have said you can consider. You don't have to, though. So these are kind of optional things, and they can only be considered after you comply with all the federal and state requirements. So one of those is respecting the voters' choices. So after you've met all the state and federal requirements, you can choose, say you have two maps that equally comply with the state and federal requirements. Then you can consider, does one of them keep each council member in a separate seat? And does the other one pair council members? Then you can pick the one that keeps council members in a separate seat. Again, not a requirement, just something you can do. And the idea is that if two council members end up in the same seat, well, then in the past, the voters picked them. The voters may want them both to get reelected for another term, but the lines would tell the voters, sorry, even if you want to, you can't. So that's the court's thinking and saying that's an acceptable consideration. Respect the voters. And again, it only comes after the state and federal requirements. You can also, within a very small percent within that equal population requirement, you can underpopulate a district a little bit if you know it's going to grow faster than the rest of the city. So an area where there's already a development that's nearly built or anything like that, you can underpopulate that seat by only about 2 or 3%. But you can say that's why I underpopulated it, is to offset that coming growth. Really, most growth will all be addressed after the 2030 census when the city redraws the lines in 2031. But that is one allowable consideration, again, not a requirement. So that's a quick spin through them. Of course, we'll have a Q&A and we're happy to come back and talk about any of these in more detail at that point. So let's go to the next slide. There's a lot of data in this process, and I'm not going to go through all this data, which is probably giving you all a sigh of relief. So the key number is at the top left. You see the 2020 census number, total population, 196,980. We divide that by the 6 districts that the council has initially said is its goal. And that means that each district has to be right about 32,830 people. So each of the 6 districts will have right about that number within a couple of percent plus or minus of that. Then for each map that comes in, we as the demographers will be providing all this information. So you'll see it in the second box, the citizen voting age population. That's looking at the percent of eligible voters that are in a different the various ethnic groups. Over on the right-hand side, you can see percentage of immigrants, language spoken at home data, language fluency levels, and then in the bottom right are ones that often get a lot of attention. The percentage of renters versus the percentage of owner-occupied housing. And right above that, percentage of single-family housing versus multifamily housing. So if someone's interested in, hey, there should be one or two or however many districts where renters are majority, they'll be able to look at the demographic stats for each map and see how many districts are there where renters are a majority. So this is just to introduce you to all the data that'll be provided district by district for each map that's submitted or drawn. We go to the next slide. Going back for a moment to the Federal Voting Rights Act requirements, I mentioned one of the groups is Latinos, and we cannot divide Latinos in a way that dilutes their voting strength. If you look at this map, you can see the purple areas are where Latinos are less than 25% of the citizens of voting age. That's CVAP. So really you can see where there's some blues, kind of the 35 to 50% light blues, and a few of the green, yellow, and reds where Latinos are a majority of the eligible voters in that block. Up in the north and over in the east, though, there are a couple of red ones where they're 75%, but those are very, very small population blocks. So where those get assigned is not going to impact the demographics of anyone's district. But along the I-5 and along the City of LA border in the south, you do see concentrations. So we want to be sensitive to not dividing those neighborhoods in ways that would dilute that voting strength. We go to the next slide. Similarly, you can see that we really two pockets. This is more of a traditional map that we'd see. Up in the north, up in La Crescenta, you can see an area where Asian Americans are really 35 to 65% of the city blocks up there. And then over in Rancho San Rafael, you can see the light blue, green, and yellow areas where Asian Americans are more concentrated than they are elsewhere in the city. Of course, Latinos and Asian Americans are everywhere in the city. These are just the geographic concentrations where they could influence the demographics of a district, and that's where the Voting Rights Act, the Federal Voting Rights Act, really focuses on them. We go to the next slide. African Americans, again, African Americans live in all parts of the city, but there's nowhere where African Americans are geographically concentrated that we'd have to worry about a potential Federal Voting Rights Act violation. And the question, of course, in Glendale comes up, if you go to the next slide, what about Armenian Americans? So Armenians are not a protected class under the Voting Rights Act, but they are obviously a community of interest. You know, high percentage of immigrants, a lot of non-English speakers or English as a second language speakers. All these kinds of factors definitely qualify them as a community of interest. And as many people are probably aware, Armenians are very hard to get data on from the Census Bureau. So this data is Armenian percentage of registered voters, and it's from a political list firm called PDI. But it does give a sense of where there are concentrations similarly. Of course, Armenians are a very large group in Glendale, so you can see different concentrations. But there are a couple of areas where the green and yellows are more prevalent than in other parts of the city. So we'd want to respect those as lines are drawn and look at whether those areas are divided in ways that dilute their voting strength. We go to the next slide. Okay. Okay, so other potential communities of interest. Similar to Armenians, we can look at communities of interest where there are socioeconomic factors. There can also be communities of interest that have a shared city issue. And we won't go into that today. You can really, we're looking to hear that from you. But there are also socioeconomic factors. And you can see these are just samples. And all this data is on the interactive review map that's on the city website. And I'll show you that in a moment. But just to quickly go through examples to get you thinking about what could be a community. Well, if there's areas that are more likely to have children at home than there are in other parts of the city. You can see in particular where you get lighter colors, the higher percentages north of the 210 in La Crescenta. That could be a community of interest. Similarly, Spanish spoken at home could be a community of interest definition. The top right is percentage of households where the annual income is $75,000 a year or more. So you can see that definitely in the northern parts of the city, there are more households where their household income is over $75,000 a year than there are south of the freeway in the city. So that could be a community of interest if you believe it to be. Renters in the bottom left, similarly, and multifamily housing, as I mentioned, those two are where the city really shows a clear difference between north and then the freeway corridors and south of the freeway. So we're just giving you a sample of things you could share with us that you consider serious communities of interest that should be considered in this process.
And
Go to the next slide.
I was just
Sure.
going to emphasize here what you mentioned. I'm glad you said that the data is also available on the interactive review map. I know it can be hard to really zoom in on these maps that you're sharing on your slides as a viewer here tonight, but the slides themselves will be posted to mapglendale.org afterwards as well. And then again, we'll be showing the interactive review map where anyone accessing that can really dial in and see this data at your leisure at the screen of your choice. So just wanted to foot stamp that.
Thank you for that, Jen. And yeah, and I would note too, if you're seeing our heads as big as the slides, if you go up to the top right and click on the view button, you can change that to standard or side-by-side gallery, and that will make the slides bigger than as handsome as I believe it to be, than my handsome head. So next we get into some Glendale specific stuff, and this slide and the next one are really to start the discussion. These have not been declared any kind of community of interest, but they seem to be logical things. So we want to hear from you if you agree with these should be communities of interest that are considered through the mapping process. First is the homeowner associations. These are handy because they're defined parcel by parcel, which houses are in and out of them. And so here's a demo map. And again, you can zoom in and out on the map that's on the city website to really see where the boundaries of these different HOAs are and look at how the different maps divide or unite them as we get draft maps. And then the next slide, the city has put together kind of as a quick reference map, not as anything official. The council has not anointed or approved this map at all. This is really just a working kind of pocket guide, looking at different boundaries of where people often refer to themselves as being these neighborhoods. And one of the goals tonight and in these outreach forums is to see, do you agree with these? When you look at what this is defined as your neighborhood, do you agree? Or would you actually define your neighborhood as being larger or smaller than that? And we would love to hear from you what you consider to be your neighborhood, especially if it differs from what's on this city rough map. So we go to the next slide. So that's a lot of information. And let me take it back a step to say we have the first round of hearings. We're really looking to hear from you on defining your neighborhoods and communities of interest. So what we'd love to hear from you in the discussion is, what is your neighborhood? And of course, because we're drawing maps, we need to know, what do you consider its geographic boundaries? And it could be something very specific like a street or the river or anything like that. Or it could just be, my neighborhood is the area around this park or the area around that school. We just want to hear from you what you consider your neighborhood. We go to the next slide. And then similarly, your communities of interest. They're very, very closely related ideas, but they could be a difference. Community of interest, again, needs to be a geographically defined area, but it could, rather than being a neighborhood, it could be like along Glen Oaks, a shared interest, or along Verdugo, a shared interest that goes across multiple neighborhoods where there's a shared interest or a shared socioeconomic factor that would lead to, and this is key, that would lead to that area benefiting from being together in one district. And before we launch into kind of your chance to weigh in for the first time, I do want to note, keep in mind as we're talking about these areas that sometimes neighborhoods and communities want to be kept together. They want to maximize their ability to elect a voice for them on the council. And so if you have the whole neighborhood or the whole community of interest in one district, obviously it gives that community the best chance to elect someone. But that only gives you one vote on the council. And so keep in mind, it's still going to take a majority of the council. You know, if we go to 6 districts plus a citywide mayor, it'll still take 4 votes of those 7 people to pass anything. So sometimes a community of interest will say, you know, we want to be divided. we want to have a say in the election of 2 council members or even 3 council members. So that gives us a step up at getting to 4 votes for our policy issue. So as you're wrestling with your neighborhood and community of interest definition and how you define those areas, also keep in mind, is my community of interest better off all being in 1 seat? Or is it better off being divided so we have multiple voices? There's no right or wrong answer to that question. It's more, what do you think works better, or what do you think will work better for your area? So with that, I will hand it back to Jen to take us into the discussion in the next slide here.
Okay, great. Thank you, Doug. And this is the first time that we'll open it up to the floor and really get some dialogue going this evening. And we do want to hear your input on communities of interest. So in just a moment, we'll be sharing a blank sheet, and that will simulate a whiteboard. So as we go out and do in-person workshops, we'll have a real life board or sheet that we'll gather input on. And tonight we'll make sure we jot down your notes to be able to document those and make sure that they are shared as an official part of the record and part of the process. So just some questions to jog your thoughts this evening. We'll want to be thinking about who is part of your community. What are some meaningful places your community recognizes or gathers at? What are some common concerns you share with a group? What are some common cultural characteristics that unite a community? What are common work-related traits that bring a community together? What is significant about the physical environment? And what areas benefit from staying together in a district, or potentially being split, as Doug also mentioned. So we'll see if we have any raised hands at this time.
And while people are hopefully clicking on that raised hand, I do want to note in the Q&A, one of our participants, thank you very much, has already shared one important community feedback thing, which is that the note, thank you for that note about Crescenta Highlands. Now that HOA now includes the far north. So that is exactly the kind of feedback we're looking for, and we do definitely appreciate that. And we'll be noting that and taking that into consideration. And there was also the question again from Ms. Fisher, thank you for that, about will we show the population by neighborhood? And yes, when we, in the next stage where we are showing you the resources available online, we'll show you how you can look at that.
And thank you too for mentioning the Q&A. So if folks don't necessarily want to speak this evening, but have thoughts, you're more than welcome to type them in the Q&A. And while we see if we have any thoughts coming in, I was wondering, Doug, if you might be able to share some examples of communities of interest that are common in other similar types of cities?
Sure. Yeah. So we often get areas around a park often are consider themselves a community for really 2 reasons. Number one, they know each other, they socialize together. And number 2, they have a clear city issue, the park, and that they share a concern about, and they want to make sure that the council is listening to them on. So that's a good example. If it's a small park that, you know, only has an immediate neighbors that go there, maybe they want to be kept together in 1 seat because there aren't that many of them. So that'll make sure that they're heard by whoever their council member is. If it's a really big park, for example, if you're in Los Angeles and you're talking about Griffith Park, you know, that's probably a park that's better off being in multiple districts because number one, it's really big and people on different parts of it have different interests. And it's such a big issue that they probably want multiple council members paying attention to it. So parks can be a concern. In Glendale, you know, we have down at Edison, we have the city school district partnership managing Edison Elementary and all the facilities there. So, you know, the immediate neighbors of Edison could certainly qualify as having a shared interest and a shared issue, and sometimes some shared concerns coming out of the activities that go on at Edison. So that could be another good example of a community of interest driven by that. And of course, you know, the socioeconomic factors, the big ones in Glendale, I think are pretty clear. The renters and multifamily housing issues, communities. Of course, those are both really big areas and you know, much larger than the size of a district, as we saw in that last map. So if residents want to narrow that down and focus on, you know, what a specific area that has specific shared concerns, we'd love to hear that within those larger communities.
Okay, thanks for those examples. And while we were chatting, we got a couple more inputs. So I'm seeing again from Ms. Fisher, some clarification, far north is gone and that area is now Crescenta Highlands. So we can update our note there accordingly. And then another question we got in related to communities of interest is if there is population data available of the informal areas defined by the city in that map you shared.
Yeah, so it's not in that one map, but when I jump to the website in the next stage, I'll show that.
Perfect. Okay, well, we'll give folks another minute or two and see if any additional thoughts come up. In the meantime, I do want to emphasize community of interest input is always welcome. And so there are 12 in-person workshops coming up and 1 additional virtual workshop. There'll be lots more opportunities to have these conversations. And input is also welcome online. So we'll be sharing more about mapglendale.org. That's the city's dedicated districting website. And there's actually a great community of interest form that will guide you through the types of questions we just talked through, and you can type in your input later on as more ideas come to mind. So those are always great opportunities as you continue to engage in the process.
So we did get another good question from an anonymous attendee. So, it's a good one about are non-residents able to participate in this process? For example, a Disney employee who works in Glendale but does not live here. And yes, this is just like every city issue. There's no difference in terms of who can speak, who can weigh in, and who can share their thoughts. Ultimately, the goal is to get the best map possible for Glendale. So if that map is drawn by a Glendale resident, great. If it's drawn by someone who doesn't live here, but the Glendale residents and the council ultimately agree that that is the best map, that's fine too. Typically, I won't speak for this council, but typically when we do these projects, the council obviously is weighing the input they get. And a Glendale voter, probably the council member might give a little bit more weight to their input than to someone who has an interest in Glendale but doesn't necessarily live here. But that weight can certainly be offset by the quality and thoughtfulness of that input. So ultimately the goal is to get the best input, and nothing's going to be cut off and kept secret because it doesn't come from a resident. Everything, one of the things we love working with True Pepe Smith and we love working with Glendale because both are very dedicated to let's share everything. Total transparency on this project is the goal.
Definitely. Okay, oops, we've got even more input. Okay, so we've got a comment here from Alan. The Verdugo Mountains may form a natural boundary between districts. So that's a great note to write down there on our sheet.
Oh, and I didn't mention this earlier, but I will be showing later on. Residents may know that Glendale Unified already has by-district elections, as does Glendale Community College District. And so later on, I'll be showing those maps. What triggered the thought is that they agree with you, and they do use the Verdugo Mountains as a boundary from the districts. So
all good input so far. All right, any other comments to add in the Q&A before we keep going? Give it another minute or so. And thank you again to those who have already chimed in. We really appreciate it. Okay, we've got a question here. What if we don't want districts? So that is feedback, and that is part of the input that can be shared in any forum. So that's noted here, since you've already shared it here as part of the webinar, that'll be recorded and posted. And then all the methods of communication, whether it's through the website or the email address or the phone number we'll be sharing, those are all vehicles for sharing that type of feedback. So that is part of the process.
yeah, feel free to share that thought or statutorily, under the state law, the purpose of the first 2 hearings is to get input on communities of interest in neighborhoods. But of course, any opinions you want to share about this process or even opposing the process, we're happy to take and take back to the council.
Absolutely. Okay, and then we've got more comments for our sheet here from Ms. Fisher. Bear in mind that both CUSD and GCC districts include residents outside Glendale. So that is good to keep in mind as well.
Yep. Yeah, and we'll show that on the map. That appears on the maps when I show them. Definitely agree.
Okay. Well, I feel like our feedback at this point is gearing more towards some of the maps and process questions that we'll be getting to in the slides as we go. So it'll be a great segue to stop sharing the slide or the sheet at this point, and we'll go back to the slides. And Doug, back over to you to talk through the mapping tools.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. So now we'll get into a little bit of the how can you weigh in on this process and actually draw maps? So one thing I want to emphasize is that the tools I'm going to walk through are intended to empower you. There's no requirement to use any of these. If you want to just sketch a map on a piece of paper, just write an email or a letter or just speak your thoughts, that is all entirely welcomed and appreciated. You don't have to use any of these tools. And also there are a number of tools for whatever level of tech you might want to jump into. So you'll see, I'll walk through, there's a really simple, essentially a Google Maps type of tool just to let you look at maps and look at where lines are, but not draw anything. It's just a simple review tool so you can make your thoughts and comment on the maps that other people draw and submit. There's also, of course, offline options for those that either don't have good internet connections or just aren't comfortable using a computer. I'll show you a paper tool that has population numbers on it. So you can actually draw a map using just one piece of paper. They will be population balanced, and you can draw it so it's contiguous and addresses the other requirements. So it's that easy as just using one piece of paper if you want to. And for those that want to dive in head first, I'll show you a full-blown online mapping tool that has all the details and population numbers and lets you go in city block by city block and really fine-tune your maps. So again, none of these tools are required for use. These are simply to empower those that want to use them. And we do welcome whatever input, even if you just want to draw a map on paper. We will actually take all the maps that come in, process them through our mapping system, generate all that demographic data and present that. So whatever tool map comes in, it goes out to the public and to the council looking just as professional as all the other maps. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is the interactive review map, and I'll touch on this a little bit. And once I touch on each of the tools, then I'll jump in and show you them live. But this is the interactive review map. It really is a lot like Google Maps. You can see in the top left just a plus and minus. That's to zoom in and out. There's a box at the top where you can enter your address, and it will zoom in to that address. The part that differs is over on the right, the layers box. And right now, you see the population units I'll talk about in a moment. There's also the neighborhood boundaries and the HOA boundaries, maps that are there. I'm sorry, the neighborhood boundaries and the Glendale Unified boundaries and the Glendale College boundaries are all shown here. And then there's all that socioeconomic data. You can see grayed out because we haven't zoomed in on it. But if you check those boxes, all that data will appear. And once we have draft maps, the draft maps will be listed with a checkbox next to them as well. So you can easily look at it, zoom in and out, and compare the maps. So again, this is just a review tool, really easy to use. If you can use Google Maps, you can use this tool. Go next slide. This is the paper kit. You can see that an image of it on the right. Again, very easy to use. You can see each of the parts of the city have been drawn into what we call population units. And they're hard to see on your screen, but if you get this and print it out, you can either go by the city clerk's office and ask for it, or you can just go to the city website. It's there as a PDF and download and print it. And I will note too, it's available on the website, as you'll see in a minute, in multiple languages. But on here, you probably can't read it on your screen, but it does give you that target population number that I mentioned earlier. It also tells you what the maximum difference between the largest and smallest districts can be. And so you can then start adding up the numbers in these little units to draw your districts and send it in. And then the email address, if you want to just take a picture and email it in, that tends to be the easiest. Or you can drop it off at City Hall or mail it into City Hall, however you wish. But you can see there are names around it giving you the key roads. Obviously, with all the numbers on it, there are not a lot of street names on it, but it does give you the key roads to orient yourself, and then you just draw your plan and send that in. And if we go to the next slide, And so I'll briefly touch on this, and then, as I mentioned, I'll jump to the actual maps and show you that these all live. But DRA, or Dave's Redistricting App, is a tool that's been around for 20 years at the state level. It was developed for looking at which states might be gerrymandering or not gerrymandering. About 2 years ago, the nonprofit that runs it, it started as just one guy, Dave, 20 years ago, but now there's about a 10-person nonprofit that runs this. They added some functionality so we can use it for local projects as well. And very briefly, before I jump over to it, you see at the top where it says Glendale City Council map template. Right below that is a little paintbrush and a little eraser. And it really is that easy. You just pick your district by the color in the top left, pick the paintbrush and paint in which precincts, and you can actually, as I'll show, go down to individual city blocks to draw your district. And it'll give you the numbers as you draw and tell you, are you balanced or not? So with that, let's jump in, and I will switch over and share my screen. Oh, we have a couple of questions, look like. Oh, so there's a question. I joined late. Oh, I was going to mention this. I saw we were getting more participants, and that's great to see. And two things. Yes, this presentation is being recorded, so you can watch the whole thing. And the PowerPoint it's not on the website yet, but it will be on the website. We'll be posting this presentation after we finish. So with that, let me share my screen. And switch over. There, Jen, can you see the Glendale website on your screen?
Sure can. Yep.
Oops. Yeah. So on the website, you saw it. When you go to the city website, boom, here's the header and the link to the project website. Of course, I wasn't quick enough because it scrolls through, but that link takes you right to the project website, and you can see the tabs at the top. So you can just click on whatever language you want to see this site in, because it's available in all those languages. And the homepage starts out with some information about what's going on and the city's change. And then a very handy, I love these videos that, and I can say that because they're not my work, they're Drew Pepe Smith and the city's work. But you have little introduction videos about what's going on and how to participate in all the different languages. And then, of course, a quick summary of how to participate, as we were telling you today. Also on the website, you have your calendar with all the official council hearings, all the workshops listed, and so you can jump around and see when the next workshop is. Once we have draft maps, of course, as all the draft maps will appear here, and as the lists are narrowed down, the narrow groups will be highlighted here. As you think about what you've heard today, you can come back here and submit your community of interest information. It's just a simple survey form, and you are asked a couple of questions. You can just fill in and share your community of interest, and then that'll go into the full record of the process. Then we get to the meat of the stuff that we're talking about today. How do you draw a map? So the paper participation kit, it's a tongue twister, is in each of these languages. So you click on whatever language you want, it pops up on your screen, and you can save it to your computer or go ahead and print it directly from there. So that's really easy to get to. Again, down here below, you have the interactive review map. If you click on that link, it takes you to the site, and you can see this is the whole city. As I zoom in, these other features become visible, and other options become visible. So this is where you can get, you know, I showed that Asian American map. So you can see those same colors in each of the areas of the city. You can get into percent who speak other language at home. This is very useful. We found that this is a handy category in addition to the voter data I showed you. This will, where there are higher percentages, especially in the South and Northwest, that's largely the areas that have more Armenians who speak language at home. One thing to keep in mind is that language spoken at home does not mean they don't speak perfectly good, fluent English. It's just the languages that families choose to speak with their kids at home. And then lots of other socioeconomic data are here, including the renters and the multifamily housing data. But as I scroll back up to the top, you get census blocks. So as those, and there's a lot of those, so they take a moment to appear. So these are the smallest units of geography where we have population numbers. And so as you click on them, you get a lot of data. And if we scroll down, you can see the individual population. So 14 people in this one, that kind of thing. So we really do get the data fine-tuned. And as I scroll in closer, the numbers pop up. And so if you put the census blocks together with the neighborhood boundaries, so this is, I don't know if you can read this on your screen, but it pops up and says Spar Heights. And you can see the purple line for that unofficial neighborhood. This lets you do two things. Number one, you can see those, you can kind of get a sense of the population in it. And if we turn off that, you can see where that, again, unofficial border line goes. And so you can say, well, I live in Spar Heights. Actually, we would say it goes Honolulu instead of stopping at Broadview. That's the kind of feedback we're looking for and encouraging. And you can see on your screen kind of the map system puts on the different parks. You can really see easily, is it single family homes? Is it businesses along Honolulu? What kind of things there? And the city thankfully has made available their zoning data. So you can actually click on that and the different colors indicate, is it commercial? Is it residential? Things like that. So there's a ton of data on this map that you can go for and zoom in and really dig into as you want to weigh in on this. I did mention too, click on Glendale Unified. Here's the trustee areas that it's adopted. As was mentioned, thank you for that. Obviously, the Glendale Unified borders extend outside of the city to take in the unincorporated La Crescenta area that is part of the school district and the college district. And that's why we can't just adopt their maps because they have a very different population number. But you can see and get a sense of their idea. And again, as I mentioned, they do follow the Verdugo Mountains as a border between the northern trustee area A and the northwestern trustee area B. And you can see in their case, South Glendale is divided kind of vertically with D and E dividing most of it and then C coming down and picking up part of it. Similarly, the college takes a different approach. Again, there are lots of decisions here which are neither right or wrong. They're just different choices. So in the case of the college, instead of being vertical like the Glendale Unified, the college is horizontal using Colorado primary as a boundary with a little jog up to Broadway for population balancing. So the Glendale High and then Colorado is a boundary of College District 4. So those are available as references. Again, we can't copy them because their population target is different than the city's population target, but it's available as a resource if you want to look at that. Also, the last piece I'll show you on this is the population units. Remember that paper kit? The city's divided up into all those little areas and given a number. Well, it's hard on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper to see exactly where those lines go. So here you can put those lines on and you can zoom in and see, oh, look, this population unit that has 2,135 people in it that I see on the paper map, here I can really see that its borders are Kenneth and Stalker. So you can zoom in and see, and it goes from Brand to Central. So that's the kind of thing you can see in the interactive map and really get in and look. And one fun thing that is also very handy, if you go up here in the top left and click on Base Map Gallery, you get all these options. So you can actually get a satellite image. And you can see where these different lines are on a satellite image. And if you scroll down, the other one I often mention is Open Streets. Open Streets is a company that put together a map and it's loading very slowly on my internet, but they actually try to label each government and business in the city. And so if you go to that and spend some time, it'll highlight, as you zoom in, it'll show you where each of those things are. And I skipped over the intro. Each time you go to this page, it opens up with the instructions. So you don't have to remember everything I just showed you. The instructions for how you zoom in and out and for where you find this information pops up every time you go to this site. And then you just close that, and boom, there's your layer option. So quick intro to the interactive map. Again, this will be even more useful when the draft maps are published and they all come in here so you can really compare where the different maps go. Now I'll switch over. For those that want to get the real power tool is Dave's redistricting app or DRA. And again, this one, because you can draw a map and you can come and go and work on your map over multiple days, you do have to create a login. So all the information is here on the city website. You first go to the DRA main site, the homepage, and you create a login here. So this is where you start. Then when you go, you come back to and you click on Glendale's blank map template. One thing we always caution is DRA is a national tool, so give it a minute. It looks first, for some reason, it always defaults to Washington, then it zooms in on California, and then it will, is being slow right now, so I'm going to cheat and go to the other window where it's already on Glendale, but it does take about 5 seconds to get to the Glendale map, and then you get this screen. So really, really simple. At the high level, you pick a district in the top left, you pick a color, you choose your paintbrush, and you simply start clicking. Or you can hold down your mouse and you draw lines. And you'll see the numbers changing here. So the area I've highlighted in green has 13,776 people in it. It's short of our target number still by 19,054. And over here on the left, oops, you can see the numbers. It's breaking down the total population by ethnicity and the citizen voting age population by ethnicity. Unfortunately, as DRA is a national tool, they don't have that Armenian data that we have. But you can look at that map if you pull it up yourself on a different tab, and kind of flip back and forth to look at those numbers as you're drawing the lines. We have added and been able to add to this map the community college lines. Oops. If I turn those on, you can see where those community college district lines go, and I simply go down here to Glendale CCD or Glendale USD, click on the little caret and click on the toggle lines option, and boom, it will put that overlay on. So if you want to use those as a guideline, you just go right here to do that. So those are available if you're interested in adding those in the overlay. You notice that these are fairly large areas that I was clicking on. These are precincts. So DRA starts with the precinct data, but as I mentioned, you have power here. So up here, it starts with precinct. If I want to fine tune this, I simply change that to block. And then when I click on a precinct, and this is the part that's a little bit tricky, change that to block, go back to my paint brush. And when I click on the precinct, it's going to highlight it and we'll break it up into the individual blocks. So that's how you get to the block level data. And then you can click block by block to choose that and say, I'm drawing this completely randomly, but okay, I got that area and I want to continue my district here and just pick the northern areas here. And you may not be able to see it very well on your screen, but the map is labeling the streets. So this is Piedmont, here's Hermosa, here's Sycamore, and down here's El Lado. So, so you can see street detail on this map as you're going along. You can also, if you spend some time on the tool, you can dig in and get in. The ethnicity data that's showing up to the right, you can show that data in these maps. So you can see that same Latino data and Asian American data that I was showing earlier. There is a ton of information on the city website and just on the DRA website, really how to get into the nuts and bolts of these maps. But I do want to get back to Q&A, so I'm not going to spend a ton more time. But the key thing is you draw one district, and then when you're ready, you just click on the next color, the next number, and start drawing the next one. And so it will highlight that. You can draw by precinct or by block and draw each district until all these numbers are very close to 0 for deviation, and that 32,830 on the left for the actual population numbers. But here's the thing I want you to remember. If you remember nothing else from this demo, remember that these are kind of your working maps. No one else can see it until you're done and ready to share it. That's why you have to log in to create it. That means when you're done, no one knows you've made it until you share it with us. And so up here in the top right is share your map. And this gives you a link to that map. So you just copy it, hit copy, and send us an email. If you don't remember the email address, we go back to the city project site. Oops, where did my city project site go? mapglendale.org. Contact, and here's the email address. So when you're in Dave's again, You go up, share map, copy the link, and send an email to mapglendale@glendaleca.gov. And that submits your map. And that way we know it's there. We also hope that you will type in some information about what your goal was. I was trying to keep my community, which is XYZ, together in this district and keep this community together in that district. But again, if you don't send it to us, we don't know what's out there. The other thing you can do is just sending us that link still keeps your map private. So you have it, we can get it because you send it to the city. If you want to share it with others, then you go back to the maps link and you publish it. So before I do that, let me make sure I don't mess up the template. So let me show you the other tool, which is erase. Use the eraser tool and you just erase what you did. So you can erase by precinct, or you can do the same thing, erase by block. The other tool is just to quickly do it, pan. You know, this is just like so many things on the web, it moves the map around. So you can zoom in using plus and minus, or just using your mouse and the roller button, and then you can pan around. And if you want to add information, like say your community is the area around a park, and you don't see the park on here, you can add your own landmarks. And then that will appear and you can see it as you work. And when you publish your map, the other people will see it in your published map. And when you submit it, we'll see it as well. You can also come up here and click on the title and change the name. So we do recommend you keep Glendale in the name because this is, DRA is a national tool. And so it's useful in their database to still say Glendale. But then you can delete the text that I put there saying this is a template and reminding you to share it and publish it. But you can enter in information you want the city to have about your map and why you drew it that way. So that's a fairly quick introduction. Let me, again, you don't have to remember all this. Even better, under draft maps, there is a video. So, oh yeah, here we go. Quick start video tutorial. So that's in about 3.5 minutes. It will show you everything I just went through. So tell your friends, go check out the 3.5 minute video to get into it. The DRA 2020 user guide is a written document if you prefer that as well. So those are your tools. Again, you've got do whatever you want, send it an email, make a phone call, show up at council, perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with any of that. Or dig in, use the paper map, use the DRA tool if you want to really get into it, or just use the interactive review map to see the details. So with that, let me quickly shift over here. Let me stop sharing. And do you want to go back to the PowerPoint? Oh, and while you're doing that, let me go back to a couple of questions that have come in. So we've got, would commissioners be bound by districts if council districts were adopted? That's an issue that the council will address. So some cities do decide to appoint commissioners from areas that match the districts, and some don't. So that's completely a council policy issue, and it's not directly impacted unless there's some language put into the charter measure that will be on the ballot in March. Short of that, there's no requirement to match or not match commission appointments to districts. Then what's the best way to get help with this map? For example, on my computer, there's no way to select many of the layers of grayed out. Oh, so the grayed out, this is the interactive review map. That's because you're looking at the whole city. So those layers will ungray as you zoom in. And I skipped over that introduction page, but it actually says that there. So the next time you go back, if you look at the introductions, it'll say that. There's just too much data that the website would run really slow if you tried to show like percent renter for the whole city in that tool. So as you zoom in, those options will appear. But the best way to get help with that or with anything is to email mapglendale@glendaleca.org, because that email is monitored. You can share your thoughts about maps, share your thoughts about communities, share your maps, and share your questions. And we welcome all of that there. So that covers a piece of this. Let's open this up and Jen, see if there's any comments or additional questions. And let me add, this is a great, if you already have thoughts about what is your community or what is your neighborhood, feel free to jump in and
Definitely, yeah. So the next thing in the slides is the Q&A section where folks can ask any questions about the mapping tools or any questions they have on the process moving forward. So thanks, Doug, for answering a couple of map questions already. And just to emphasize the email address, so those are monitored by the project team. Trepepi Smith sees them. We coordinate with National Demographics Corporation and the city. And so whatever questions you might have, we'll be fielding those. Definitely happy to help there. And I guess a couple of questions that sometimes come in regarding the maps. As you were sharing Dave's redistricting app, I was wondering if folks have thoughts on just one district or even a couple districts, is it possible to still submit it without filling out all of them?
oh, great question. Yes, that comes up a lot. Yes, that completely welcome. We would love to see, if you just want to draw one district, if you just want to draw your neighborhood, say, this is my neighborhood. It's not big enough to be a district, but please, whatever districts are drawn, keep it together. We welcome any input. One of the things that actually folks do get in trouble for sometimes with their fellow residents is they spend, 2 or 3 days getting their district just right. And then they just quickly population balance the rest of the city. And so say someone lives, over in Chevy Chase Canyon. They draw the district covering Chevy Chase Canyon just right, and then they just kind of quickly fill in the rest of the map in an hour. Well, then someone over in Northwest says, oh, that map 101 is horrible. I hate it. Well, the person who drew it really only cared about feedback on their district. So feel free just to draw your district. Don't feel like you have to draw the whole city. And often what comes up through this process is, well, someone from Chevy Chase draws a great seat. Someone from Northwest draws a great district. And we end up putting those two together into another map. So that also can be a very productive tool in how you share your thoughts and drive the final map in this process.
Okay. And then another common question that comes up as the maps are drawn, because people are curious about the numbers, how are the district numbers determined?
So the numbers in DRA, you pick a color. Most people focus on the color, but it actually comes with the number. So you just mean how they end up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or you mean how? Yeah. So that is, you can number that however you want. Ultimately, the council can change the numbers if they think there's a different numbering scheme that makes more sense. So it's very flexible. The number of districts, because we're a charter city, is very flexible too. But the council direction at this time is to go forward focusing on 6 districts with a citywide mayor. So the council would grow to be 7 people at the dais. If residents have other thoughts on how many districts, you're certainly welcome to share that now or through this process too. Oh, which leads right into a question we just got in the Q&A. Is there state law pushing for districts? Is there a min or max? Is it because of census? So the number of districts for general law city that doesn't have a charter, state law says it has to have either 5, 7, or 9 people on this. Either 5, 7, or 9 districts, or 4, 6, and 8 districts with a citywide elected mayor. Because we're a charter city, we can do whatever we want. Now, obviously, there are policy implications and practical considerations, but that's how, like, Los Angeles has 15 and other cities have different numbers because they're charter cities. And Glendale could do that. Again, the focus per council direction now is on 6 districts, but that could change.
Okay. And yeah, I'm not seeing too many more questions. And I know our concluding slides do kind of touch on the rest of the process as well. So we can see if there are any more questions. And if not, we'll...
I'm sorry. Jen, sorry to interrupt. I only answered half of their question. Is there state law pushing for districts? Yes. And actually, we're working on some more information to add to the website after the council asked for more information on that on the website. So yes, there is something called the California Voting Rights Act that the state passed back in 2002, or passed in 2001. It took effect in 2002. That law has been pushing cities towards districts, and the state has gone from having, in 2000, before the law took effect, we had 29 cities in the state out of 482. We had 29 that had districts. We've now added almost 190 more to that. So we're approaching 230 cities because of that. The California Voting Rights Act is pushing cities, school districts, special districts, all kinds of elected bodies into by-district elections. And that is that the city received a threat threatening to sue them under that law, which is what has prompted this change.
Thanks for catching that, Doug. And I think that may be a member who joined the webinar on the later side. So for folks who have the ability to go back and watch the beginning of the recording, Doug does a great job providing more background on the law and the criteria that it involves as well. Okay. So I think that wraps up our Q&A for now. Again, if more questions come up, by all means, please go to the website, email those in, give the number a call. We'll be covering all of that contact information here shortly. So we can shift gears to the next slide. And as we're talking about sharing feedback as we go, we want to make sure that we emphasize ways to stay engaged moving forward. So as we've alluded to a little bit so far, the City of Glendale is hugely committed to outreach in this process. And so we'll go over some of the outreach methods here. The dedicated website is mapglendale.org, and we've talked about that a good bit, and Doug shared the screen and walked through some elements there. So that is intended to be your one-stop shop for the information, the resources, event details, contact information, tools you can use, really everything. You'll find it right there. And as we mentioned earlier, it is available in multiple languages. So we really hope that you'll visit there and find what you need. But then we'll also be having a bunch of workshops. There will be 12 in-person workshops in the process, and then a total of 2 virtual workshops, including tonight. So we'll be continuing to share information and tools and gather feedback. We'll also be having pop-up events in the community. So if someone might not have the ability to make a workshop, but they're already out at a city event, we want to find you there and make sure that you have the information and resources and tools. So be on the lookout for more information on those. Information is also being shared via the city's social media, including some advertising throughout the process. We've got those animated explainer videos in the various languages that are on the homepage of the website and also being shared on social media. We don't want to just do digital or even just in person. We've got flyers that'll be available in print, and those can be shared in print in community members. So we'll be sending those out and asking folks to share them among your communities. And then community group outreach, so emails and direct outreach to specific civic groups and community groups that we want to make sure are informed. And then again, just really coordinating the interpretation and translation of materials with the city to reach all the different demographics of the city. And with so many events coming up, I just want to make sure we really highlight the upcoming events. So the next community workshop is an in-person workshop at Pacific Park on June 26th. And the next public hearing will be the second public hearing, and that's on July 11th. So you can find all the future meeting dates and the event details on mapglendale.org and click on this calendar. So it's mapglendale.org/schedule. And then moving on to the next slide. As we wrap up tonight, I do want to emphasize how community members can continue to engage in the process. So you can visit the website mapglendale.org to find additional information, the mapping tools, meeting materials related to hearings and workshops, and draft maps when they become available, and even more. You can email us at any time by emailing mapglendale@glendaleca.gov, or you can call the city at 818-548-4844, extension 1. And I am not seeing any other questions or anything else as we wrap up tonight. So I do believe that brings us to a close. So on behalf of the City of Glendale, I want to thank everyone for joining to share your feedback and learn about how you can continue participating in the district formation process. We hope to see you again and we have additional districting events as the process moves forward. So thanks again and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.